That emblem was approved in 1994. It belongs to a U.S. military intelligence unit headquartered at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. A sphinx looking up at a star. Now, here's the part that made me stop. Chris Bledsoe doesn't report his first major UFO sighting until 2007. He doesn't meet the being that he calls the Lady until 2012. He doesn't receive the message about a star and the gaze of the Sphinx until 2013. So, why is the symbol already there? Different centuries, different reasons for believing what they believe, but they keep pointing at the same place, Giza. And more than one of them keeps circling back to the same year. If this pattern's real, we're months away from finding out what it all means. Let me show you where this started for me.
This is Beyond the Map.
I spent decades as a professional investigator in law enforcement, forensic work. I learned one thing above almost everything else about coincidence. Coincidence at a certain level of gravity, repeating, converging, and appearing independently across centuries. Now that's something else entirely. In my experience, that level of alignment has a cause. You just haven't found it yet. So my job today isn't to tell you what to believe. It's to show you a pattern and then get out of your way. Chris Bledsoe is not a household name outside of UAP circles. Inside them, he occupies a specific and unusual position. In 2007, after a period of severe personal crisis, business and financial failure, declining health, Bledsoe begins reporting something extraordinary near his home in Johnston County, North Carolina. Lights in the sky, luminous orbs that seem to respond to his presence, missing time, and physical effects he couldn't explain. Now, that alone wouldn't distinguish him from thousands of other experiencers. What distinguishes Chris Bledsoe is who took notice. His case drew the attention of serious UAP researchers and eventually individuals connected to the United States military and intelligence community. People with credentials, people with clearances, people professionally trained to dismiss exactly his kind of claim. But they didn't dismiss it. If you're skeptical of that, good. Stay skeptical, because that instinct is going to serve you well in this episode. I've watched his interviews carefully. I've listened to the way he speaks about what happened to him, and I've observed his body language. I see a man who's not performing. I see someone who's carrying something heavy, something he didn't ask for and he doesn't fully understand. Now, I'm not telling you that his experiences are what he says they are. I'm telling you that serious credentialed people in the national security apparatus agreed that something around Chris Bledsoe was worth their time. This is where we start. In 2012, Bledsoe says something shifts. He's under pressure from his faith community. He's ready to stop talking about this whole thing publicly. And that's when he describes encountering the being that he calls the Lady. In Bledsoe's telling of the story, he says, the Lady says this: when the star of Regulus, she called it a red star, when Regulus is red on the horizon in front of the gaze of the Sphinx before daylight, that moment would mark a change in humanity's knowledge. That's specific. Not watch the skies, not be ready. A star, a horizon, the gaze of the Sphinx before daylight. Now, this is where I need to slow down and be careful. Bledsoe later connects this to 2026. But by his own account, the Lady doesn't hand him a calendar date. He takes the description to a friend who takes it to astronomers, and they point him toward Easter of 2026. And when people recheck the sky math, a lot of them say Easter doesn't match the alignment the way it's described. Late August, early September, maybe even October of 2026 might match better. Bledsoe himself, in more recent interviews, he shifted toward the fall of 2026. Now, I'm not going to stake this episode on a day on the calendar. If the month is wrong, is the year still right? Because that's where the military logos enter the story. And it gets hard to dismiss this as just a prophecy. So we have a modern experiencer story, whatever you think it is, built around the image, a star quartered at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. Wright-Patterson is one of the most discussed locations in the entire history of American UFO research. It's the alleged repository of material, possibly remains from the Roswell crash, and the subject of decades of FOIA requests. It's named in the testimony of multiple UAP whistleblowers, and that's where NASIC lives. Here's their official emblem. A sphinx gazing upward toward a star. Now, that emblem was officially approved in 1994. That is years before Bledsoe's first sighting, long before he says he ever heard the word Regulus. Now, here's where it takes from odd to, okay, wait a minute. In 2022, Space Force activates its National Space Intelligence Center, the NSIC, and they adopt a logo that explicitly traces back to the NASIC heritage. Same Sphinx, same star. The official explanation is reasonable: wisdom, knowledge, the past looking into the future. Well, I'm not dismissing that explanation, but as an investigator, I can't ignore a simple reality. There's two completely separate domains: a classified intelligence emblem from 1994 and an experiencer prophecy from 2013, and they share the same unusually specific visual idea. I'm not telling you they're connected, but I'm telling you this is the moment where we stop shrugging and start asking a little bit better questions. This could be nothing, but it's strange that it is this specific. Wright-Patterson has been named in the testimony of multiple individuals with national security credentials as a site connected to UAP materials and research, possibly even the famed biologics. Senator Barry Goldwater, a former Air Force Reserve Brigadier General, spent years attempting to gain access to a specific area of Wright-Patterson that he believed contained UAPs or UAP-related material. He was denied every single time, and he spoke about it publicly and on the record before his death.
I called Curtis LeMay and I said, General, I know we have a room at Wright-Patterson where you put all this secret stuff. Could I go in there? I've never heard him get mad, but he got madder than hell at me, cussed me out, said, don't ever ask me that question again.
The intelligence agency using the image of a sphinx gazing at a star since 1994, it's headquartered at the most UAP-connected military installation in American history. Well, you can decide what to do with that. Here's where I land as an investigator. There's two possibilities. First, the Sphinx is gazing at a star and is simply a powerful ancient symbolism that was used. Wisdom surveying the cosmos, and a U.S. Air Force intelligence agency in 1994 and a UAP experiencer in 2012 independently arrived at the same image for entirely unrelated reasons. That's a legitimate possibility. The second, certain people inside certain institutions have long held a belief or a piece of knowledge about the Sphinx, about what it represents, about what it watches for, and that knowledge has shaped the official imagery they encode onto their identity and the information they share with people like Chris Bledsoe. Here's the strongest normal explanation and what it doesn't cover. The normal explanation doesn't address why the astronomy matters. It doesn't address why credentialed people took Bledsoe's prophecy seriously enough to run it through astronomical software. And it doesn't address why the year they pointed him toward is the same year that the world's most prominent Egyptologist has promised to open a sealed door at Giza. Now, I don't have those answers. What I have is something a little more uncomfortable. I actually have six more threads, six more independent sources from different centuries, different disciplines, and different parts of the world, all pointing at that same location. And several of them seem to point at 2026. Let me show you what I found. In a criminal investigation, a single witness can be doubted. A single piece of physical evidence can be contested. But when independent sources with no knowledge of each other, separated by centuries, by continents, and by disciplines, when they all describe the same thing, this is when a good investigator stops looking for the coincidence and starts looking for the cause. You already have two threads, Bledsoe and the logos, and here's what surrounds all that. Hold this thought. Six more threads. Let's go. Long before Edgar Cayce, long before Chris Bledsoe, long before any modern fringe theory, the medieval Arab scholars who studied and documented the ancient Egyptian monuments believed something remarkable. The Sphinx was a guardian, not a monument, a deliberate, intentional guardian placed at that precise location to watch over something concealed beneath it. Specifically, a concealed library, a repository of ancient knowledge hidden beneath or near the Sphinx, protected by the monument itself. These were scholars, historians, philosophers, and scientists operating within one of the most intellectually sophisticated civilizations of their era. This tradition predates Cayce by roughly 600 years, and it predates Chris Bledsoe by nearly a millennium. If it's coincidence, it's a pretty loud one. Edgar Cayce died in 1945. During his lifetime, he gave over 14,000 documented readings, entering a self-induced trance-like state and speaking on subjects ranging from medicine to history to what he called the Akashic records. Cayce described a hidden hall of records beneath the Giza plateau, repeatedly and in specific detail. He said the entrance was near the right paw of the Sphinx, and he said it contained records from a civilization so ancient that mainstream archaeology has never acknowledged its existence. He said something that has aged in a very specific way. He said the hall would be deliberately uncovered when humanity reached a moment of global crisis and fundamental transition. I'll leave it to you to assess whether we are living through a moment of global crisis or fundamental transition, considering disclosure might be fundamental transition. I just don't want to overstate that. I just notice it. A woman named Dorothy Eady moved to Egypt and learned to read hieroglyphics at an incredibly young age, almost as if she already knew the language. And she was hired as an official draftswoman for the Egypt's Department of Antiquities. She worked alongside credentialed Egyptologists, and she was respected by them. On one occasion, Egyptologists working with her in a temple described her identifying a specific wall painting in complete darkness in a room whose inscriptions had never been published in any accessible form. The skeptic on the team, by his own account, accorded her a new level of respect after that evening. And independent of Edgar Cayce, with no documented connection to his work, Dorothy Eady stated that beneath the temple of Seti I lay a library vault of religious and historical records. That's the same claim, different source, different era, different location. She pointed at the city Abdios rather than the Sphinx specifically, but the same fundamental assertion. The ancient Egyptians deliberately concealed a library of records that has never been found. You already know Thread 4, the NASIC emblem approved in 1994, the NSIC logo carrying the same heritage into Space Force, and a Sphinx watching a star encoded into the identity of U.S. military intelligence at Wright-Patterson, years before Bledsoe received the prophecy. I put it here just to stay in chronological order. That's 4 threads down and only 3 to go. This is where it gets a little harder to explain. In 2025, a team of researchers from the University of Pisa and the University of Strathclyde published findings that went viral across multiple platforms. They were using satellite radar and scanning technology, and they announced a vast underground complex stretching more than 6,500 feet directly beneath the pyramids of Giza. The research team themselves suggested in their own words that this could be the legendary Hall of Records. It could lie within this underground complex. Now, this isn't a fringe claim. This is peer-reviewed. It's research from 2 accredited European universities. It was published in 2025, and it points at the exact same location that medieval Arab scholars, Edgar Cayce, and Dorothy Eady all pointed out independently across the centuries. And here's what the normal explanation doesn't cover. Why do these independent data points keep arriving at the same coordinates? Zahi Hawass is the most prominent Egyptologist in the world. He spent much of his career aggressively dismissing theories about secret chambers or hidden libraries and lost civilizations beneath the Giza Plateau, which is what makes what he announced recently so remarkable. Hawass has promised to reveal what lies behind the sealed door at the end of a previously unknown 30-meter corridor discovered deep inside the Great Pyramid in 2026. He called it a discovery that will rewrite history. He said 2026 is when the world will know. The man who spent decades telling the world that there's nothing hidden beneath Giza is now telling the world, just watch 2026. He doesn't know about the Chris Bledsoe story. He has no connection to the UAP community. He's not aware, as far as anyone can determine, that a non-human intelligence told an experiencer in North Carolina to watch for new knowledge arriving in 2026. He's just a prominent Egyptologist opening a door in 2026. If that's true, what else has to be true? And then finally, there is Chris Bledsoe, thread 7, the man who is told by a luminous figure that he can't fully explain in 2013 to watch for the moment when a star rises in the gaze of the Sphinx. Medieval Arab scholars, Edgar Cayce in the 1930s, Dorothy Eady in the mid-20th century, a classified military intelligence emblem, 1994, university researchers with satellite radar, 2025, and the world's most prominent Egyptologist in a recent announcement, and a UAP experiencer in North Carolina who received a prophecy in 2013. 7 threads, no documented connections between any of them, centuries apart, all pointing to the same location, most of them pointing to the same year. I want to be honest about what this is and what it isn't. Now, this isn't proof. I have not proven there is a Hall of Records beneath the Sphinx. I have not proven that Chris Bledsoe's lady is a genuine non-human intelligence. I've not proven that Space Force logos carry intentional esoteric meaning rather than the coincidental symbolism. What I have shown you is a pattern of independent convergence across time, across cultures, across disciplines. And that, in my professional judgment, exceeds the threshold of most reasonable coincidence. Something is pointing at the Sphinx. Something is pointing at 2026. And someone inside the institutions that don't typically discuss such things publicly appear to have known about it long before Chris Bledsoe ever received a prophecy in a field on a riverbank in North Carolina. The question I can't answer, and the one I keep coming back to, is the simplest one. What do they know? I want to go back to the date because I haven't been able to let that go. Chris Bledsoe received a prophecy in 2013. The lady told him to watch for the moment when the star rises red in the gaze of the Sphinx before dawn. Well, that moment would mark a change in humanity's knowledge. She did not give him a date. Bledsoe took the celestial description, gave it to a publisher who sent it to astronomers, and they ran it through their software and came back with that Easter of 2026 date right upon us. The problem is that the astronomy doesn't support it. Regulus is below the horizon at the dawn on Easter 2026 in Egypt. The alignment the lady appears to have been describing actually occurs in late August, early September 2026. Bledsoe himself has recently walked back from the Easter date. In more recent interviews, he shifted toward the fall of 2026 and suggested the dates may matter less than the continuous unfolding of the knowledge itself. Now, as a former investigator, here's how I read that. The prophecy appears to be genuine to Bledsoe. The astronomical calculation appears to have been wrong. Either the wrong parameters were entered, or the output was misread, or there was intentional misinformation. As the Easter date approaches without the predicted alignment, the framing is naturally adjusting toward a window the astronomy actually does support. Now, that's not a cover up. This is a human being trying to reconcile a genuine experience with imperfect information. I've seen that 100 times in investigations. The core claim remains intact, and the specific date was always the shakiest part of it. If you strip the Easter date away entirely and just ask, does the year 2026 have any independent support as a significant window? The answer, as you've just seen, is yes. Repeatedly, from sources that have nothing to do with Chris Bledsoe or his astronomers. Let me offer you 3 frameworks for understanding what we're actually looking at. Framework 1, honest calculation error. The most straightforward reading. Bledsoe received a genuine experience. He took the lady's description to the astronomers through his publisher friend, and with the best of intentions, they made a calculation error. Wrong parameters, wrong hemisphere, wrong season. The year landed right. The specific date didn't. Under this framework, everything Bledsoe says is essentially true. The prophecy was real, the astronomical calendar was misread, and 2026, supported by Hawass, the Khafre project, and the September-October Regulus alignment, remains the window worth watching. So if framework 1 is correct, the episode's thesis, what we're talking about tonight, this kind of holds up. The date problem is a calculation error, not a credibility problem. Now there's the second possibility, and one that's harder to dismiss. It's the lady's message was never meant to be decoded through a star chart. Prophetic language across the cultures have typically worked through an image and a metaphor, not through astronomical precision. A red star rising in the gaze of the Sphinx before daylight may be a description of a feeling, a cultural moment, maybe even a geopolitical event, not a specific date on a telescope calendar. If you subscribe to that framework, then the attempt to pin it on Easter 2026 was always going to produce the wrong answer. Not because the prophecy was false, but because it was being read with the wrong instrument. Then there's the third possibility. And this one I find the most interesting as an investigator because it doesn't require anyone to be wrong about anything. What if the astronomers got the season wrong, but the year right? The rising of Regulus, the alignment that best fits the lady's description, does occur in 2026, just not in April. It's either September or October. Bledsoe's own revisions fall toward the September October date in 2026, and that's consistent with this reading. So is the September astronomy. So is the Hawass announcement, which doesn't specify a month, just a year. The Easter date may be wrong, the year may be right, and that distinction matters enormously for how we evaluate everything else in this investigation. Here's what I keep coming back to. Across all three of these frameworks, calculation error, symbolic prophecy, not literal, or right year, wrong season, one thing remains constant. The year 2026 has independent support, multiple independent support from sources that don't know each other exists. That's not something I can explain away either. And when I ask if this pattern is real, what are the implications? Well, I keep arriving at the same uncomfortable place. What would the discovery of a hall of records beneath the Sphinx mean for institutions that currently hold authority over human history, like over religion, over government, over the story we tell ourselves about where we came from and what we're capable of? I'm not answering that question. I'm not sure anyone can until the door opens. But I think that's the right question. And I think 2026 is when we find out whether it was worth asking. So let me tell you what I know. I know that 7 independent sources spanning roughly 1,000 years, drawing on different languages, different frameworks, different relationships with evidence, have all described the same thing: a hidden archive beneath a Sphinx in Giza, ancient knowledge deliberately concealed and waiting to be found. I know that several of those sources are pointing at 2026 as the year something changes. I know that the world's most prominent mainstream Egyptologist has publicly promised to open a sealed door at Giza this year. I know that classified U.S. military intelligence agencies headquartered at Wright Pat and one of the most connected UAP connected bases in American history has been using the image of a sphinx gazing at a star as its official emblem since 1994. I know that a UAP experiencer in North Carolina received a prophecy, at least by his account, with that exact image in 2013, and that the astronomical calculation pointing him toward 2026 may have gotten the season wrong, but got the year right. Now, I know I can't connect all of those things into a single coherent explanation. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But here's what I've learned. In my years in working cases, particularly strange cases such as this, where the evidence refused to resolve cleanly, about what to do when the pattern is real, but the answer isn't quite there yet. You stay with it. You keep watching. You don't force a conclusion that the evidence doesn't support. And you don't dismiss the pattern. Just because you can't explain it, you stay with it. Medieval Arab scholars believed the Sphinx guarded a hidden library. It's recorded. That was centuries before modern theory existed. Edgar Cayce, the sleepy prophet in the 1930s, named the right paw of the Sphinx as the entrance to the Hall of Records and said it would be found during a period of global crisis and transition. Dorothy Eady, official draftswoman for the Egyptian Department of Antiquities, respected by the Egyptologists she worked with, independently described a hidden repository of ancient records at Giza with no apparent connection to Cayce's work. And the National Air and Space Intelligence Center, headquartered at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, encoded the image of the Sphinx, gazing at a star into its official emblem in 1994. And Chris Bledsoe was told by non-human intelligence in 2013 to watch for the moment when a star rises in the gaze of the Sphinx, and an astronomical analysis that points toward the date of 2026 as the year that the alignment occurs. And researchers from 2 European universities announced in 2025 that the satellite radar had revealed a vast underground complex beneath the Giza Plateau and suggested it could contain the Hall of Records. And Zahi Hawass, the world's most prominent Egyptologist, a career-long skeptic of hidden chamber theories, has promised to reveal what lies behind a sealed door in the Great Pyramid in 2026. 7 sources. No documented connection between any of them, centuries of separation. All point to the same location, most of them pointing to the same year. And in my experience, I've learned one thing about coincidence at this level. It usually isn't coincidence. I started this investigation as a skeptic, not of the phenomenon. I've spent enough time around this material to know that something genuinely strange is happening in this world with UAPs and, in my opinion, NHI. But skeptical of the specific claim that 2026 is a year worth watching, that these threads are connected. Now, I'm still a skeptic in that regard. I haven't really proven anything today. But I stopped believing this is a coincidence. Something is pointing at the Sphinx. Something is pointing at 2026. And whatever is behind Zahi Hawass's sealed door, whether it rewrites history or confirms exactly what we already know, we're going to find out this year. I'll be here when that happens, and I think you should too. If you've got a piece of this story that I haven't found, a connection, a source, or something that adds to the pattern or even challenges this pattern, drop it in the comments. I read them all. I'm not looking for confirmation. I'm looking for what I might have missed. That's the only way this kind of investigation moves forward. If this is the first time that you've found Beyond the Map, welcome. And this is what we do here. We take strange seriously. We follow the evidence wherever it leads. And we don't claim more than we can support. And we don't dismiss what that pattern is telling us just because it's uncomfortable to talk about. If you want to stay in this investigation with me, subscribe, hit the bell icon. I'm going to be watching everything that unfolds in Giza this year, and the Hawass announcement, the Khafre project, whatever comes next with Bledsoe, and I'll bring it back here as it develops. All the links, the sources, and the references from the episode are in the description below. I'm Buddy T, and this is Beyond the Map. I don't have all the answers, but I know where the questions are worth asking. And right now, they're all pointing toward the Sphinx. Stay curious.